Good morning. Greetings and welcome to the Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning. The Future is Now conference organized by DataBridge Market Research based in Pune, India. Thanks to conference organizers and to Soumya Chauhan and team, it is my privilege and pleasure to be here to share with you on my theme, how has artificial intelligence challenged the boundaries of humanistic thinking? The current presentation builds upon our journey, started with the beta version of the first web browser in early 1990s, building the world's top digital site, search engine, and social network that became the world's first, foremost, and largest global digital transformation network. Adopted and recommended by worldwide firms, governments, institutions, as well as world leaders such as Microsoft founder Bill Gates and leadership programs at Harvard MBA, we have the privilege of serving clients and patrons such as Goldman Sachs, Google, IBM, and Intel, to name a few. The PDF of the presentation is available from the SSRN, the Social Science Research Network author page link, given on the cover of this slide, which you see here. And it provides you with open access to our interactive knowing, building, monetizing platforms for AI, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, quantitative, cyber, crypto, quantum, and other advanced technologies. These are examples of technologies on which we lead and build global, worldwide CEO, CXO practices spanning Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Pentagon, and global organizations as industry expert and faculty subject matter expert for programs such as MIT and Princeton. As Global Risk Management LLC, with focus on AI, machine learning, and other advanced technologies, we build and lead CEO, CXO digital practices and related risk and uncertainty management practices. As pioneers of human-centered AI and meaning-aware AI, inspired by a genetic algorithm pioneers such as Dr. John Holland, then at the Santa Fe Institute, the top complex systems think tank in New Mexico, we are recognized as a pioneer of chaos theory and self-adaptive complex systems practices in industry reviews such as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, which reviewed us as global industrial benchmark and a resource for worldwide organizations. As the original global digital social enterprise and the knowledge creating company with the humanistic mission to educate, enlighten, empower, we built the Global Digital Transformation Network with the Humanistic Focus as your survival network for the new world of business. When invited by the founders of the Silicon Valley Angel Investor Network, TIE Silicon Valley, to lead and guide Silicon Valley CEOs and venture capitalists on how to build global digital ventures on the wild web. That was about 20 years ago. At that time, no one could have imagined at that time how wild the web would become at this point in time. Our ventures provide know-how for doing things cheaper, better, faster with AI, quantum, and other computing technologies, saving you up to 90% time, cost, and resources in knowing, building, monetizing, while ensuring resilience, sustainability, and business continuity of resulting networks, practices, technologies, ventures, teams. In the current historically unprecedented, uncertain, and adversarial environments. The Silicon Valley venture capitalist, Roger McNamee, he recently implored the Silicon Valley to embrace human-driven social networks that empower rather than exploit users as the next big thing. Having pioneered such networks, we were invited to guide Silicon Valley 20 years ago on building digital enterprises for the wild web. Today, we are ready to again lead the Silicon Valley to further advance human-driven technologies, building on our US Air Force Research Lab, Commercialization, Academy Ventures, AIMLExchange, and C4I Cyber. It is in the above context of being the pioneers of human-driven social networks that aim to empower worldwide users and have already been doing so by building the world's first foremost and largest global digital transformation community network, empowering millions, including worldwide countries, organizations, and individuals. Our latest ventures underscore that the greatest legacy we can leave the world is the world. Given the most powerful AI technologies have become tools of exploitation, such as for surveillance capitalism, and the world is on the precipice of a nuclear winter, which is to us a much greater concern than another AI winter. Roger McNamee, he had said in his time, this report, I mentored Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. And he says, I loved Facebook, but I can't stay silent about what's happening. I propose that Silicon Valley embrace human-driven technology as the next big thing. In America, if you want to solve a problem, it helps to incorporate the profit motive, which we can do by shifting, but this is critical, by shifting the focus of technology from exploiting the weakest links in human psychology to a commitment to empowering users. Then he asks, what would human-driven technology look like? And says it would empower users rather than exploit them. He further adds that we can focus on this notion of agency, which is attributed to IT, and we need to think more carefully about it. And in our context here today, his same question can be asked in case of young students, for example, say in the USA, in India, or other countries of the world, who are searching for financial security, learning to trade financial securities to make money, quote unquote, using a financial brokerage such as Robinhood, which is a popular brokerage hitting many of the headlines nowadays for its gamification of trading and other attributes. The digital users are harmed by unauthorized collection and surveillance of data, behaviors, and life to monitor, control, manipulate, and exploit. Now, these are the very characteristics of what is known as surveillance capitalism. The crisis of data privacy, which is worldwide, is therefore, in fact, a crisis of control and exploitation of users. You can download a white paper addressed to the US Congress on these issues by clicking on the text shown on this slide, as well as you can also check out the book on surveillance capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, earlier a Harvard Business School professor, whose work I have built on earlier in my research conference proceedings and publications on self-determination of digital users. The cases of human caused exploitation, such as in case of financial exploitation, where SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, charged a popular financial brokerage for front-running client stock orders. That is one instance of such exploitation of users. Other cases also involve things like autonomous weapons, which have shown a remarkable false positive rate of up to 90% in terms of untargeted killings. And one can also think of the same terms in terms of the increasing economic disparity from AI-driven job elimination. Now, these are some points which the renowned computer scientist, a Carnegie Mellon grad from Pittsburgh, and Taiwan computer scientists currently in Beijing, he talks about these issues. Therefore, from our perspective, when we relate to his discussion, which you can access from this slide by clicking on the hyperlink. If you downloaded the PDF video, you can access it from the SSRN link, or you can go to my homepage or LinkedIn, and I will provide access here too. We consider that digital life of most individuals using digital media, including internet, cyberspace, and so forth, relates to the digital transformation of life more or less primarily on three activities, which are search, learn, and work activities. Now, these three key activities can be, have been, and will be targets of manipulation and exploitative economic and social control and serve them, as mentioned earlier, in the context of surveillance capitalism. But similarly, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it is noted in the US Declaration of Independence, could very well serve as the humanistic basis for the digital user's emancipation, self-determination, and happiness. These are some themes recently mentioned by the top democratic countries as well as other geopolitical models, happiness of the citizens in our United Nations General Assembly speeches by the country heads. So referring back to the Silicon Valley's VC's reference to the next big thing, what should human-driven AI technologies look like? How would they be similar or different compared to the current AI technologies? Focusing on delivering that next big thing can advance not only the humanistic thinking about AI, but also its pragmatic application for empowering digital users in contexts, including the ones just discussed. It is important to recognize that the problem of the human agency attributed to AI needs to be rectified, given that it is not AI or any other technology, algorithm, or model which is responsible for outcomes, good or bad, but those who are responsible for programming, monitoring, and executing such technologies. It is not AI, which seems to be one interpretation of Kai-Fu Lee's discussions, that AI can cause autonomous weapons. But specifically, it is how AI is used by humans, as are all other technologies. This as well applies in the context discussed by Kai-Fu Lee, the same AI tools which can be used to build or to destroy human lives, human nations, humanity, and human civilization. The same tools can be used and should preferably be used for the greater good of all instead. The outcomes of AI technologies, such as we discussed in the context of financial trading of securities, these technologies behind payment for order flow are hence the responsibilities of those programming and deploying them. Therefore, to protect our digital users' interests, in such cases where exploitation of users, security holders is evident, regulations such as by SEC may be necessary if the specific technologies and their utilization is adversarial to the interests of the traders using the stock trading platform. My point about the incorrect attribution of human agency to AI algorithms is made explicit by Roger McNamee. He says to shift the focus of technology from exploitation to empowerment. AIMLExchange venture, which is our Air Force Research Lab Commercialization Academy venture, its aim, as documented in its original document, is to create the globally accessible, globally trusted, and globally secure World Wide Web in these most unprecedented adversarial digital environments. Starting with our current focus on enabling knowing, building, and monetizing of global high-tech CEO, CXO startup teams. Hence, our development focus on life equals search plus learn plus work trademark. Advances are know, build, monetize trademark. Business model with focus on humanistic AI for user empowerment toward building the next big thing. Next, we develop each of 3 specific key activities of search, learn, work with focus on humanistic foundations for applications of AI, followed by how AI challenges and advances the boundaries of humanistic thinking in our development context. Since Google used our world's top-ranked digital site and search engine to build its global footprint as our client before its IPO, we have been part of invited discussions about the reliability of various major search platforms, some of which are shown on this slide, including Google, Bing, Amazon, and so forth. A key ongoing challenge relates to the meaning ascribed to any specific string of symbols or images and image that is typed for search. The classic problem has been distinguishing and determining when you search for the keyword penguins by typing it in a search engine, if the AI should think of it as birds called penguins, or the US ice hockey team called penguins, or something else. The AI, in fact, does not think. It just maps the user inputs to respective pre-programmed responses in its archived search database, such as by using supervised learning training using multiple samples. The AML-based system has no real contextual meaning creating or meaning interpreting capacity. Similarly, with Amazon, the focus of the discussions has been on distinguishing between genuine and fake versions of the various products in its catalogs, as well as the product reviews, which are posted and often gamed by several systems users. The relevance of subjective and user-constructed meaning of intrinsically meaningless data is also focus of related next generation encryption paper and presentation that you find listed on the slide, and you can download by clicking on the links for the PDF document. What would human-driven technology look like? In the context of our venture AIMLExchange, to empower the digital user, we liberate the user from the captive control of any specific technology and enable those users to know, build, and monetize while saving up to 90% time, cost, and resources without even charging a single dime from them. For instance, in case of search, we have started a set of more than a dozen search engines, including search engines from France, Australia, China, Russia, as well as the privacy-conscious search engine DuckDuckGo. Our user gets self-determined choice of choosing which specific engines to use and for what purpose, in addition to deploying other privacy security enabling choices, which all of us have, such as using the web browsers in private or incognito modes while using reliable VPN services. Our referral venture, AIMLExchange, advances on a prior global digital transformation network, ranked as world's top digital site by Computer World, as well as the top search engine and SEO network, adopted and recommended by industry leaders such as Microsoft founder Bill Gates, by vice chairman of the Big Four firm PricewaterhouseCoopers in her Fast Company magazine interview. In fact, Fast Company magazine had noted about our Brent Global Digital Transformation Network that if you can't find it on Brent, you probably don't need it. Therefore, we pay thorough attention to our specific digital customers and clients and their needs, and we are deeply in touch with those, not only following, but leading and guiding those needs as a globally recognized industry benchmark across most of the top tier business technology publications across academia, practice, and policies. We advance the user's experience beyond staring at a blank search box for these search engines with our focused industry-leading frameworks built on global digital execution leadership, which is recently guiding the Department of Defense wide AI machine learning capabilities adoption and use. This was a custom version built by the Air Force Pentagon USF CTO team. And for that, each license costs $30 million. And the original MVP prototype, which we have built and offered to everyone with much advanced extended capabilities, we are offering that to all for free. Jeffrey Hinton, the pioneer behind the neural networks, the deep learning neural networks, he had said that he is now deeply suspicious of backpropagation. Now, when we think of search and various algorithms powering many other technologies related not only to search, but tracking, profiling, authentication of users, and so forth, we need to understand the deep technological frameworks and architectures. And if you're not familiar with backpropagation, we've given you a link to one of our postings, because we post many of these messages to advance the knowing, building, monetizing of our global networks of practitioners, CEOs, CXOs. So please feel free to click the links and follow along in the papers, presentations we have provided along with the various resources. Therefore, he mentioned, based on his observation in this particular article, which we have mentioned here, my view is to throw it all away and start again. Now, we are seeing similar signals coming out from the top experts in the field. Now, these are the smartest people, including the recent 3 Turing Prize winners, which is the highest prize awarded to the AI pioneers. Another MIT technology report shown here on the top is one of the representative examples of what we look, understand, and guide on as model risks, which are evident aplenty in the current AI research, development, and related practices. That paper relates and states the process used to build most of the machine learning models we use today can't tell if they will work in the real world or not, and that's a problem. Now, that has been a lesser concern for us as we have guided industry-wide, worldwide practices spanning diverse disciplines, including global financial systems practices in financial trading, financial risk management for hedge funds and so forth, for healthcare practices, such as recommendations made by the National Institute of Health for application of some of these models, for the National Association of Insurance Commissioners as the national expert on cyber insurance risk modeling assessment, where we have seen major fundamental flaws propagated by prescriptions made by some of the most known organizations, which we have already documented in many of the documents we have shared with the network. Consistently, to mitigate this model risk problems, our invited presentations at the Princeton University and the State of New York Governors Conferences over the last few years, 5-6 years or so, among other presentations and expert papers, have advanced R&D and practices on mitigating model risks by model risk management and model risk arbitrage. Now, these particular developments go all the way back to the beginning of the World Wide Web in the mainstream. 28 years building on my PhD R&D, these are focused on building AI specifically on human-centered, meaningful, meaning-aware, and meaning-driven, context-sensitive focus on learning, development, and growth. Now, that focus has been across both human as well as machine systems, as well as human-machine systems, AI being one example of such systems. That R&D resulted in the first paper published in the top AI journal and ranked as the top paper by the journal. That paper serves as the foundation stone for meaning-aware AI and human-centered AI. It was published about 2 decades before the Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute was founded. With complementary focus on human-machine systems for intelligence, knowledge, learning, development, growth, and sustenance, we developed the humanistic basis for human-machine intelligence, knowledge, and learning, leading to global top rankings in global R&D as well as in practices, as reviewed in worldwide academia, policy, and practices publications. To demonstrate how digital users have become tools of their tools, we show here results from the same search data inputs, which we feed into 2 different search engines, DuckDuckGo and Google. Many of you are familiar with both of them. And as you see, they yield different results. While DuckDuckGo still seems to retain the educate, inform, enlighten focus, that was our foundation for building and guiding the global digital transformation, starting with the top digital sites, search engine, and social network. Therefore, our focus in this search is for the quotation, which we have used multiple times over the last several years. And that quotation is, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, that quotation is a deep philosophy and popularized quote, which is attributed to the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Over years, we have seen that Google has downranked the original search results. Seemingly, its commercial focus on selling the latest audio or video album by one of the latest singers has been overriding its educate, enlighten, and empower focus. Or it may be a likely reflection in its transition a few years ago from its motto of do no evil to do things right, where your right may be my left, and those issues are critical. Or it could be a function of evolving algorithms based on the user interests and demands. Maybe the interests have shifted from philosophy to entertainment, which could be the signs of times and what we can make of them. When philosophy is getting downgraded over entertainment, so that one can more easily sell and buy commercial artifacts instead of advancing the overall good of humankind. In fact, doing things right, which is the new motto of Google, we have defined that in one of our information strategy papers going back 20 years and distinguished it from the doing things right. And these two aspects we have used as the foundations of IT strategy and architectures underlying our developed technology platforms, as well as advices guiding the worldwide governments, firms, and institutions. Unlike the overhyped cliche, as data being the oil of the new economy, informed view from the trenches, from those who have lived their life, building and managing largest data-driven technologies, such as in JAIC, the central AI body for the DoD, traditional common sense still applies that data devoid of meaningful context of creation, application, and use is still GIGO, G-I-G-O, which has stood always for garbage in, garbage out. Similarly, despite the repetition of this cliche that AI is not the new electricity, even if it were, it doesn't really matter, because when electric power goes out, AI is pretty much dead. It has no agency. And furthermore, even if AI is new electricity, if you want to assume that for a moment, consider how many people around you, your friends, neighbors, colleagues, do you know who are in the business of electricity production? Although almost everyone is a user of electric power, which is becoming a much more scarce commodity nowadays because of various factors affecting supply chains, geopolitics, and many other issues, including weather patterns and so forth, which we'll not get into here, but you can find it on our feeds. Going to the next slide here, we have again heard something which was started by the hypesters from Silicon Valley. In fact, they labeled themselves as merchants of hype. And they used to focus on saying stealth mode, which is kind of vaporware. And from our perspective, stealth mode is so cliche because this term is getting adopted worldwide, including some DoD entrepreneurs recently are proclaiming to be in stealth mode. I'm not sure what that means, if it means anything at all. We do not even need to proclaim that we are in stealth mode. While we have been transparently and openly, based on our interviews covered earlier by magazines like Fortune and Inc. Technology, we are open about obsoleting what we know before anyone does so. And we focus on not only on obsoleting our own knowledge, underlying everything what we are doing, but profiting by creating the challenges, opportunities others even have not thought about. This particular presentation right now is an example of how we continuously create the digital future, where of companies who have million times more powerful technologies or financial resources, because we are the world experts as retained by the United Nations about 20 years ago to guide national knowledge economies and national knowledge societies focused on the increasing critical importance of human capital, intellectual capital, and social capital. Those are our strongest strengths, and being a world leader in not only applying those strengths, but also leading the world in how to understand and apply those, that is an asset to us. In that context, we have been noted in various interviews, editorial reviews of our digital ventures, practices, networks, technologies, and teams as pioneers of various practices like data science, knowledge management, virtual organizations, digital innovation, self-adaptive complex systems, such as covered by Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And these have been covered in every known top-tier business technology publications worldwide. We started as the knowledge creating company, trademark, going back to early 90s, with a beta version of the first web browser, And we focus consistently on knowing by doing first, and then leading the world to apply digital practices, even before books and courses are created on those practices. That's where we have been starting with the beta version of the first web browser. We started with leading Silicon Valley CEOs and venture capitalists, pitching a top Silicon Valley VC for $1 billion funding for a top digital site, search engine, social network, where I was invited to keynote the plenary opening keynote for the annual meeting of the Thai global, the Silicon Valley based global angel investor firm. And we had a lot of great people there, some of the smartest people, including founders of companies like Sun Microsystems. And one of the person there, from one of them is a very well-known VC to whom I made this pitch, recognizing later that those companies did not give billion-dollar funding in those days. In fact, I read a story where the same venture capitalist was most likely responsible for trying to sell Google for less than $1 million at that point of time to another search engine, which no one remembers at this point of time. When the world's top marketing firm, Ogilvy, pitched IBM to us as a client for the global practices of knowledge management, for which we became the go-to resource, both in practices as well as in R&D, in terms of being ranked in the top 3 worldwide practitioners and scholars. At that point of time, we incorporated into a LLC going back to 1998. Then we had companies like Intel, Google, and others come to us as our clients for digital transformation services. Business Week wrote about our global CEOs network, what every CEO should know. And members of these networks have included worldwide CEOs, CXOs, and leaders from top companies such as Goldman Sachs to US and worldwide governments and universities across the whole spectrum. The global financial crisis brought to us the opportunity to lead the top leaders at Wall Street investment banks and hedge funds with $1 trillion AUM, assets under management, with our recent leadership in subsequent years, leading to the leadership and guidance through our US Air Force Research Lab ventures for the Air Force, Space Force, and Joint Chiefs of Staff. Our current high-tech knowing, building, monetizing practices, they span AI, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotic process automation, data science and advanced analytics, fintech, crypto, computational quant finance and trading, blockchain and cloud computing, cybersecurity and cryptography, penetration testing and ethical hacking, model risk management and model risk arbitrage across the various technologies, some of which you mentioned, including quantum computing and quantum cryptography, with the latest focus advancing the R&D and practices on quantum uncertainty and time-space complexity, among other related technology themes. To empower the digital user, our latest ventures provide you our interactive online template here to know, build, monetize, saving up to 90% time, cost, resources without paying a single dime. For instance, our online tools provide you a single search. You just input one search, free, and provide you free and open access to related articles, videos, patents, courses, papers, codes, datasets, models, algorithms, question answers, webinars, conferences, hackathons, multiple social networks, recruitment sources, job boards, incubators, angel investors, venture capitalists, as well as the government-wide sources of funding, including small business innovation research and small business technology transfer. About 20 years ago or so, I served on 32 national expert panels for the National Science Foundation, funding multi-million-dollar innovations for the US at that point of time in cyber computing and cybersecurity in these domains. Therefore, most of our focus has been building on real-world practices at the highest levels, at the level of the nations, governments, and global enterprises. Therefore, what we apply, we learn, and then we share through our thought leadership, as we are doing right now. Our digital resources are made freely available to worldwide users, and often we are retained by worldwide CEO, CXO teams to take them on as paying clients in our specific technologies focus and work with select few of them given available time. Going back about 20 years or so, since I had been retained to advise Intel Corporation, write an expert paper on them for the next generation e-business architectures. Our consulting rates have been in the 5-figure US dollar range per hour. At this point of time, we have been taking new CEO CXO clients in digital startups, given that we want to encourage such startups as a private venture capital and a PE firm. We have been taking up to 90% stakes in equity, including cryptocurrencies like Ethereum. The exponentialing is, I think we need to focus on the various issues in learning. Therefore, the learn focus, what are the key challenges and where the bigger disconnects are, where we have not only been contributing as a pioneering resource, followed, adopted by programs like Harvard MBA program, as well as written up by the global accrediting organization, such as AICSB, comparing our ventures and saying, would there be programs like Harvard and Wharton in the future, or will we be the global online leaders? And in fact, Harvard and Wharton both have been among our clients and patrons in a global network of various organizational and institutional users. The key challenge which has been impacting the students, as we have been following in the student loans, resulting in unprecedented debt levels, which many students are finding difficult to pay. And having been a professor who has served in US public, state, and private universities, taught and mentored over 2,500 students earlier in my career, with recent years being an industry expert, SME and faculty SME for programs like MIT and Princeton, I'm familiar with the plight of college students. Having taught students across the whole spectrum, from two-year community college to Fortune 5 CXOs in the top executive programs like Carnegie Mellon and Kellogg School of Management. Before I became a faculty subject matter expert, such as for MIT AI machine learning program, I have earned a top 10 PhD and 5 masters in computer engineering and finance, including an MBA. Now, the number of credits I doubled up in my PhD, which was equal to 2 PhDs credits, and subsequently I followed up with credits equal to 4 PhDs. But if you look at all our research publications papers, they do not focus on what I have studied or read or learned. Our focus has been on building the future. Therefore, we are questioning the gaps in existing theory and practices and knowledge and data and business and technology, as the Fortune magazine wrote about in one of the interviews. Luckily, my top 10 PhD and MBA were funded by scholarships and fellowships, where I got to work with some very smart professors who were ranked as the top professors in applying the digital practices and IT practices, including strategy and B2B models worldwide. I still recall one of my work-study undergrad from the 2-year college who was required to purchase the introductory text, which is costing at that time around $400 in ITIS. And he shared with me the tough choice he had to face for paying his rent or buying the textbook. I think that's a tragedy which we are seeing of the most talented people being impeded by the exorbitant, which I would call exploitative costs of the educational infrastructure, which I think has gone haywire. Therefore, I can very well relate to the above concerns about the increasing disconnect of exponentially increasing and expensive college education to the real world needs. It is not me, but many of the top executives, including the recent CEO at IBM, who has been articulate about it. Therefore, this has been more relevant. We have been seeing in fields like IT, computer science, network and computer security, and computational and quant finance, the so-called STEM fields in which we need to focus more, invest more, and where I have served as a professor and industry expert. On this slide, following on the focus on learning, you see the MIT Computer Science and AI Lab and MIT Sloan School of Management executive education program for the management and leadership, which was focused on artificial intelligence and business strategy. It provides access to hundreds of free online courses, full text articles, and books on AI, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotics, and robotic process automation, including UVA and UGV, as we call the drone systems, either in air, on ground, undersea, and so forth. This resource, which was built as a online global community learning resource for the global community of the MIT AI Business Strategy Program, it covers the focus on strategic, technical, architecture, and programming issues aligned with the MIT Computer Science and AI Lab curriculum, which are taught and delivered, leading about 200 executives from companies such as Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Silicon Valley companies, as well as serving as head resource mentor for providing these most outstanding resources, including this particular guide, including other online resources, drawing upon my experience as the founder of the world's largest digital transformation network with millions of worldwide users. Therefore, I was serving as a resource for about 1,000 executives for the duration of the course I taught. Following up our focus on learning, on the other hand, I'm seeing increasing interest in building digital startup enterprises among the pre-college crowd, which is a very positive sign. Recently, a few weeks ago only, I was interviewing a first-year Harvard student CEO who had already founded and sold his first startup in high school, while also holding interesting roles like project manager with some big tech firms such as Apple. Now, this has become more feasible now with many of the American tech companies such as Apple, Google, IBM, and Tesla making the 4 years bachelor's as optional and instead focusing on real world applied industrial skills. I mentioned about IBM CEO earlier. We have seen some very interesting developments amongst programs like the IIT Delhi, for which I had the pleasure of serving in my role as KM Pioneer on one of the IT Journal's editorial advisory board member. We have seen IIT Delhi start a program for the PhDs to build a venture as an option to a thesis. Now, this is something which I did on my own. I was not given an option in my PhD, but I wrote the material for 4 PhD dissertations. Out of them, one became a formal PhD to satisfy the educational academic stakeholders, and 3 others resulted in the digital ventures, which became the world's top digital site, search engine, and social network, which pioneered the global digital revolution, spanning Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Pentagon, as well as worldwide organizations. Now, there are many great online applied IT courses. Now, you're seeing the self-learning focus, which we have been writing about in our focus on the control doctrine, self-control, self-learning, self-leadership. You'll find plenty of R&D papers on those aspects. If you are interested in those, in my list of publications, you can hit the Google Scholar page on my list of publications. Now, these sites, like some developed by a professor from computer science, a professor of computer science at Stanford, Andrew Ng, he has developed Coursera, which I think is one of the most fascinating dreams for any learner come alive on the web. You can subscribe to as many courses as you want. In fact, I'm enrolled, I don't know, in hundreds of courses. I wish I had the time to follow along in all of them, but I'm too busy creating new knowledge, new practices, new technologies, new ventures. But I try to find time as and when I can go back, depending on the projects I work on, to look up those resources, particularly to see where the gaps are. And similarly, having been involved in building standards for global national information infrastructure, global information infrastructure, and NIST in various applied practices, we have been leading the risk engineering standards, and we often visit those to see where the gaps are and where we can make contribution based on our presentations and publications. When I was invited to advise the government of Mexico on the development for inclusion in the G8 electric governments. Now, government of Mexico was one of my government clients, in addition to US federal government, for which I served as an invited council partner. Then we have the government of Mexico, which I'm sharing about, invited to the parliamentary gathering of all the parliament ministers, as well as the 600 IT leaders for the country, 13 CIOs, to help them understand how they can become an electronic government to become the G8. There they mentioned about interest in building the academic programs. But that was quite a while ago. They wanted to build computer science academic programs. Now that episode reminded me about a discussion board of the IT practice journal Data Mission, which I have known for quite a while, long before even I was in computer science and software engineering. On that discussion board, I had seen a message from a Mexican woman in early days of e-business, an area which I built some of the early globally accredited courses on, inquiring how she can sell her hats worldwide online. And that was a fascinating view of an entrepreneur who wanted to move the needle, who may not have been trained formally in academy, focus on computer science. And that also reminded me of some of my best students at a state university, where I built and delivered some of the earliest ASC best accredited e-business and knowledge management curricula. Furthermore, that also reminded the data mission focus of the message board story of my own self. How I got interested in programming originally in ALGOL, the algorithmic language, while I was a production and process engineering executive engineer with the Indian automobile manufacturer, the largest manufacturer at that time in India, Suzuki Maruti. It was the leader of India's quality revolution at that time. And while they're having read an IT data mission report, which observed that many of the IT programmers were self-taught, I used to spend my evenings and the night shifts after my day job as a production and process engineer, self-learning programming on the 2 GB mainframe, and then getting certifications from various certifying bodies in Unix, C, and Fortran, and subsequently being recruited by India's top software development company. That's where basically, while I was a production process engineer, I happened to read also the 5th generation project, focus on the meaty Japan's AI focus, a book written by Edward Feigenbaum. Later, when I would be interviewed for the chief scientist role for the US Air Force, I would recognize Edward Feigenbaum was most likely at that time a professor at Stanford. I didn't know about him much, but it was fascinating to see the stuff which I had the chance to kind of read because of my own interest going back. Now, interestingly, for this conference, I got an invitation from Soumya Chauhan, and I thank her for connecting the dots here. In motivating your inspiration and enthusiasm for a know, build, monetize focus on the legacy models of searching, learning, working, I've used specific anchors. For the search, I focused on our digital search engine, which was used by Google to build a global footprint. For the learn, I focused on our industry interviews, such as by Fortune and Inc. magazine, about the 2 aspects of human and machine learning. The first being acutely observing and bridging the gaps between business technology, theory, practice, and data and knowledge. Now, these have been underlying the foundations of our roles in advancing data science, AI, and other digital practices. The second issue focused on being the first to obsolete one's own knowledge and advancing beyond building new practices, technologies, ventures, teams, and networks, as I am doing in the course of this conference presentation right here with you. For the work focus, I'm motivating our R&D and global practices, given our pioneering leadership of self-adaptive complex systems practices, driven by meaning-aware and human-centered IT, KM, and AI. The primary differentiation of our approach is going beyond the past data-driven practices to building the digital future by building and leading change, uncertainty, and complexity management practices. These examples are shown up here in the interviews for the CIO magazine, CIO Insight, and Wall Street Journal, as you see here. So we earlier discussed our current know, build, monetize practices, technologies focus, and how we create a digital future as the world's first foremost leading digital enterprise worldwide. In addition to providing world-leading industry knowledge in form of a knowledge base of publications, presentations, ranked for global impact among Nobel laureates, we provide digital tools, frameworks, and networks of practices, such as to CXO teams such as your team, which may exist along the spectrum spanning digital startup launched by a Harvard freshman, such as I shared about, to the world's largest multi-trillion-dollar companies, countries, or governments, such as the hedge funds on Wall Street, which we were advised, guided, and led. And it is likely we have had the privilege of working with, leading, or advising someone like you earlier, therefore we can relate to your specific concerns. Now, how are we actualizing and executing a model of self-adaptive complex systems? Now, in several interviews across various media, including the Business Standard India, as well as the supply chain management publication by the Institute for Supply Management, we have noted our focus is on smart minds using smart tools smartly. So that's our focus on building smart minds using smart tools smartly. We characterize these minds as quantum minds, as human machine systems in various constellations for managing quantum uncertainty and time-space complexity, which has been the focus of our recent guidance as shared in the New York State Cybersecurity presentation. Therefore, in terms of pioneering the humanistic focus on AI, our background goes to the pioneers on whose shoulders we stand, such as the father of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener. He discussed in his masterpiece, The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics and Society. We still have the discussions in our archives of the first version of Global Network, which we launched, where we were discussing how to best design such self-adaptive systems at a global scale. Now, these observations at the core of humanistic thinking, they relate to AI and other command control related cybernetic systems, such as we focus much more deeply in the C4I cyber venture and a control doctrine. And going back to the story which we shared 20 years ago about the knowledge creating company before Google, which you can also access from the text by clicking on the slide. Here are a couple of quotes by Buddha, which provide the foundation, and I would leave it up to you to read those. But these have been the two key quotes which signify are the keystones of what we have been doing, what we have been helping others know how to build global self-adaptive systems. Elon Musk is one of the archetypes of the creator economy, and we have seen the evolution going back to our research teaching practices, going back to Maruti Suzuki, where I was reading and sharing how to be an entrepreneur, and the journey has spanned being an entrepreneur to creator economy and creators and super creators. That's where we are seeing the biggest shift right now. And that's where we are seeing Musk and others, including school dropouts without any college education, such as the billionaire entrepreneur Jared Isaacman, who founded and captained the first all-civilian crew space flight a month ago. Therefore, having pioneered the global digital transformation by creating the world's first largest global digital transformation network, search engine global SEO network, we are amongst those creators and have been creators going to the beginning of the web. And we plan to continue helping, enabling, and advancing the cause of such creators and knowledge professionals for the greater good of humanity and the human civilization. At this time, I would like to open our discussion for any questions and answers. Thank you.